Well, Jim, our next question sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Rob in Brussels, Belgium. Did old school wrestlers do fantasy booking while on the road? I could imagine this was done for laughs or possibly brainstorming how to enhance current angles that they may be booked in. If so, any memorable hypotheticals you could share with us?
Oh, God.
Is that when most people who became bookers impressed someone so they became bookers in the car?
Well, actually, that's the thing. I mean, as far as hypothetical, on the way back from Bossier City, Louisiana one night, I thought of this. I ain't gonna, but yes, that's where a lot of guys, that's where Jerry Jarrett impressed Roy Welch in the car on the way from Nashville to Memphis and back every Monday night. Jerry was, he was a kid that he had graduated college and not gotten in the wrestling business. He had become, oh, goddamn, what the fuck? I think he had done sales and some shit, but the wrestling bug had bit him because of his mother, and he was around it, etc. And so he starts riding with Roy Welch and giving his ideas. And Roy would say, well, what did you think of the matches tonight? Well, I thought so-and-so or such and such or whatever. And that's the way he ended up being a booker before he even was a wrestler. And that's where you sometimes would impress a veteran or somebody with, God, this kid actually kind of knows, what the fuck that he's talking about. So, yeah, but when the boys were just amongst themselves and everybody was on the same level, yes, there was a lot of guys fantasy booked goofy angles, but not like in any detail or writing anything down. They'd shoot ideas around like, yeah, fucking so-and-so, he's so stiff. We ought to have a goddamn match where the loser has to get beat with a sack of wet hammers or what, and somebody else would chime in an idea and just make a joke out of it. But in a lot of instances, especially, the Midnight Express and I used to do this. I can imagine that a lot of guys did it. They would come up with not necessarily booking, but finishes. And, or, if you had sway or pull with the booker, then you might come up with an angle and pitch it to them. Or if you were already in an angle with a team, but hey, this would be a good finish to do with those guys, and then we could come back with something, you'd tell the booker that, what about if we did this and we could come back with this stipulation or whatever? If he liked it, he could work it in. And that happened a lot. Or just, guys talking about their business, especially if it was a tag team and a manager in the car, they could be bouncing stuff off of each other. If you were 3 or 4, single wrestlers in a car, you might not necessarily want to bounce a bunch of angles or ideas off the other guys. They might steal some of them because everybody's doing their own thing. And it's not like you were in a car with people from the other side. It was either all babyface or all heels. But the smart guys would do that. And a lot of times, a lot of booking was done in the car anyway, because if the booker was also a wrestler, he was in the car as much as the other boys were. So you would have a situation where, a young kid would be driving, and maybe there'd be 2 veterans, one in the front and one in the back, but the booker'd be in the back with the dome light on with goddamn book out or writing television or something. Lawler used to write Saturday morning Memphis TV on a legal pad in the back seat of the car on the way back from the Saturday or the Friday night town at about fucking midnight. And then he'd get to the fucking TV station the next morning and run off 4 Xerox copies, one for the wall in the locker room, one for the fucking director, one for the finish room, and 5, and 2 for Lance and Dave. And I found one actually the day that Terry Funk ripped my pants off. I stole the format and saved it. We weren't allowed to have shit on paper. Back then.
Wow.
But it's handwritten on a legal pad, the matches and the breaks and what was to go on the tape and what was dark just for Memphis. And that's what they worked off of because they didn't leave documentation for people to find. Nevertheless, where were we going with this?
Well, I want to ask you a question that popped into my head before, because we all hear about these stories about wrestlers back in the day on the road. They would tell stories, they would learn about the business, they would go over their matches and stuff. If we look at 84, when you're relatively a rookie. I mean, you've been at it for a few years, but you're now in the main event position in Mid-South Wrestling. You leave one of these shows, you're working with the Rock and Roll Fantastics, whoever, TA and 2. In the car, it's Dennis, it's you, it's Bobby, maybe Buddy Landell. How does the conversation start? If you're going to talk about that night's match, who starts it and how does it go? Everyone always talks about these conversations in the car. When it comes to reviewing or talking about something you just did, how would it go?
Well, that's if you had a great match, there'd be about 10 or 15 minutes of back patting, and then you'd get to listening to the radio or telling stories or whatever. If you had a shitty match, it'd be the whole goddamn way home. What the fuck? And if it was specifically somebody's fault, you would be venting and bitching. Or if something didn't work, you'd be figuring it out. Or if somebody, one of the fans hit the ring and you had a skirmish or whatever, you'd be talking about that. But generally, if something was bad, you spent more time, on that and either complaining about the guy to get it out of your system, or complaining about the situation, or trying to figure out, what to fix about it or whatever. And it wasn't really, I mean, if something had happened that we couldn't wait to get in the car and, God damn, thank God we're out of there. Boy, can you believe that motherfucker? Then anybody could start it. But if we're just driving down the road, then actually anybody could start it again, because somebody might think, when we do that double backdrop, what about if fucking Ricky shot right underneath and rolled up, and you just blurt that out and somebody would say something about it.
How long after you guys started in Mid-South, because I don't know how much you would have rode with him ever before that in Memphis, how long after you started in Mid-South did Dennis realize you observed everything?
He pretty much knew already because, besides the fact that he'd been in the territory for a while, and because I was Jimmy Hart's understudy, I'd managed him and Norvell at ringside a couple times. And, so he had worked with me. We'd been in the locker room, and then he'd known me before as a photographer for ages. So the point is, he knew from the start that, that was his comment to Watts when Watts apparently asked him something to the effect of, well, what's your opinion of Cornette's managing or promos or whatever? Dennis said he can talk his ass off. Of course, he wasn't going to disagree with Bill Watts at that point, because I think he knew Watts was already interested. But so it wasn't like when I went to Louisiana and some of the guys in the locker room there heard me, okay, Bobby, remember, bing, 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 I'm going over the finish for him. They kind of give me the side eye, like, this kid looks like he's fucking 16 and he's telling these guys what they're doing. But then once they got it, only Wrestling 2, he thought I had to be on cocaine because of the fucking promos. And Wrestling 2 was obviously, he was an older gentleman. He probably, at that point, he was like Nick Goulas. Them boys taking them marijuana pills again.
I like a good second all.
Yeah. But no, they knew, because and we were in the locker room together, in Memphis after I got into business, even before I managed them, and I'd ridden with Bobby a lot. So that wasn't an issue. Every once in a while, when I first went to the WWF, I think also some of the guys that hadn't been around were like, but by then I was a little older and been around a while. But it was disconcerting, I think, for some of the guys at first, because I looked so young and they'd never heard of me. But then after they heard the promos, or they, sat in on one of our finish meetings or whatever, they're okay, we got it.